a listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, why sport is like a religion. As we head into the weekend, many of us are super excited to watch our favourite teams take to the field. So why are we so passionate? We unpack the science behind sport and the fascinating new research on why it can make us or break us.
It's a Viking clap that rattles the foundations of GIO Stadium.
But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Friday, the 18th of July. Another sensational development in the Jeffrey Epstein story. The US president is now threatening to sue News Corp and its owner Rupert Murdoch over an article in the Wall Street Journal. The report detailed allegations of a 50th birthday gift organised by Ghislaine Maxwell for Jeffrey Epstein, with a number of letters from his friends and associates for a leather-bound album. It alleges the letter attributed to President Trump had a drawing of a naked woman with a message, quote, "A pal is a wonderful thing. Happy birthday, and may every day be another wonderful secret." President Trump has labelled the story as fake, adding, quote, "This is not me, and I'm going to sue the Wall Street Journal." As pressure continues to grow on the Trump administration over the so-called Epstein files, the White House has confirmed today that President Trump has been diagnosed with a medical condition after noticing swelling in his ankles. Here is spokesperson Caroline Levitt.
The president underwent a comprehensive examination, including diagnostic vascular studies. Bilateral lower extremity venous Doppler ultrasounds were performed and revealed chronic venous insufficiency, a benign and common condition, particularly in individuals over the age of 70. Importantly, there was no evidence of deep vein thrombosis or arterial disease. No signs of heart failure, renal impairment, or systemic illness were identified.
They also confirmed minor bruising on the president's hands was the result of constant handshaking and taking aspirin. The man accused of murdering 23-year-old Hannah Maguire in regional Victoria has changed his plea just 8 days into his trial. Lachlan Young has now pleaded guilty to murdering Miss Maguire and staging her death to look like a suicide in April last year. Young will return to court later this month. And a married CEO has been busted on a kiss cam cuddling a work colleague at a Coldplay concert in Boston. The tech mogul has been identified as astronomer boss Andy Byron and was caught on camera embracing the company's head of human resources, Kristen Cabot. When they were both beamed on the big screen, the loved-up couple quickly ducked for cover. Coldplay lead singer Chris Martin alluding the couple was either having an affair or just very shy.
Either they're having an affair or they're just very shy.
Now it's time to get into our deep dive with Professor Aaron Smith on the incredible new research that reveals the scientific secrets behind our obsession with sport. We unpack the fascinating new research that shows how being part of a team, either as a player or a passionate fan, can literally change our brains and also gives us powerful connections and a sense of community. Aaron, thanks so much for joining us. You've written this great new book, Unpacking the Psychology of Sport, and why, as Australia, Australians, we love sport. Why do you think it's almost a religion now, isn't it? Especially with how much we love our team or as a supporter. What's the psychology behind sport?
Thanks, Natasha. I think, we've talked about why sport and religion are very similar forever. But what's interesting now is that there's a suite of new evidence around cognitive psychology and neuroscience. And it seems to show that the brain doesn't really care whether our religion is supernatural or secular. What happens in the brain during worship and during fandom are really quite similar. And so I argue that this happens on a couple of key levels. So one, of course, is that sport and religion share a tribal meaning and belonging that's channeled through a common doctrine. So when we talk about being a regular fan of something, we mean a fervent interest, of course, but sport and religion, they share something special. And that special thing is faith. It's belief in something that's objectively unverifiable often, and sometimes even counterfactual. You think about the scoreboard, it's hard to deny the scoreboard, but yet as sport fans, we often have an incredible ability to partition ourselves from reality. So in that respect, both sport and religion give life structure, hope, optimism, and a tribe. But part of my argument is also that it also shares a common neurological activity. For example, if you put a sports fan in a neuroimaging machine like an fMRI and you scan their brain and ask them to think about how they feel about their club, the same part of their brain lights up as does when a worshipper does the same in praise. So that for me is part of the neurological background of why the two connect. But that's just the first part. I can continue if you like.
Yeah, look, I find it fascinating, Aaron, because I just want to pick you up on one point you made just earlier about there's the phrase that many of us know, blind faith. So obviously that plays a part in both religion and sport, because you mentioned there, rightfully so, that if you're a passionate supporter and your team is losing, sometimes there's this really bizarre reality where they'll argue everything about why their team lost when clearly they just didn't play well.
Look, absolutely right. And psychologists refer to that as an immune system, a psychological immune system, where we have this remarkable ability to confirm or reject certain ideas on the basis of how well they fit our existing ones. And I think that also fits into some of the other elements that form part of our common cognitive and neurological activity that connects religion and sport and belief. One, for example, is around the nature of the spectacle, the ritual, the symbology in religion and sport, because it stimulates a common emotional engagement, and that's what helps us partition our reality from an external sense of facts often. So whether it's singing a club song or evangelical hymn, there's a huge spike in the emotional centers of the brain. But then that leads to this cascade of neurochemical and hormonal responses, and it feeds into the brain's pleasure pathways. So that thrilling match triggers the dopamine release, the serotonin, the endorphins, and our brains find that incredibly rewarding. Now, where I'm going, of course, with this is that there's evidence then that sport is in its own way an addictive physiological mechanism. It's a bit like, in a smaller sense, when we eat some chocolate or after sex, there's that cascade of pleasure in our brains, and that helps us then reinforce the importance of our beliefs that, as you were talking about, help us partition from reality as well.
So with your research and your great book, Aaron, is it also that the same, I guess, parallel universe in being part of a religion as a part of a community sports team or part of a team playing professionally, that sense of belonging, a common goal?
The common goal is the central aspect of all this from a belief viewpoint, because that strong identification has such a fundamental impact on shaping our daily life and psychological well-being. So we talked about it providing structure and meaning and community, but it can also help to foster lifelong friendships, emotional support, and that club affiliation then leads us to a sense of resilience. So our minds are also hardwired for optimism, for hope. And so the nature of navigating life's setbacks is relevant. And curiously, one of the interesting things from our research is that it shows that fans actually bond together more strongly during periods of defeat than during periods of victory.
Really?
So there's something about the losses that also helps to attenuate our experience in real life. Being a fan can be empowering, and then you can also be part of a respected social identity within a community as well. But having said that, there are downsides to sport identification too.
So what do you mean by that? What are the downsides?
Well, it also has the propensity for antisocial behaviour when that identification becomes over-identification. We know about issues with drinking, gambling, violence, racism, abuse. But there's also a physiological element to this as well. Like, we know that fans' moods can swing quite dramatically based on team performance, and it can cause emotional distress. We know that during any intense sporting event, our stress hormones like cortisol can spike by up to 50%. In fact, there was even a recent piece of research that showed that cardiac events, that is heart attacks, can increase by about a quarter in home fans during defeats. Although that didn't apply to women, it only applied to men.
Yeah, correct. So, Aaron, I thought of straight away when you were talking about that sense of community, the joy, looking for hope. The first thing that comes to mind was the Matildas. Now, as a country during the COVID pandemic, there were lots of negative news, lots of bad world news, and I think the Matildas kind of provided that element of hope. I knew lots of people that weren't massive football or soccer fans, but everyone jumped on the Matildas bandwagon because there was this great sense of pride and supporting them and engaging in that sport. I found that was a fascinating social experiment.
Well, it's one that continues to repeat, doesn't it? Because, I mean, we talked about the nature of belonging and status, but one of the things that psychologists talk about here is what they call identity fusion. It's a situation where the sense of individuality becomes blurred with the sense of the club, or in this case, the national identity, and the two blend together, a bit like what happens with your children in a sense. And that then feeds into that sense of hope and optimism we were talking about. It's what I'd call a delusional optimism, and it keeps us resilient, for next season, but it also for dealing with the discontinuities in other parts of life. And COVID was the great exemplar of that, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
So that we've got this whole suite of psychological payoffs that persist even when the scoreboard doesn't. Because when you think about it statistically, most of us aren't going to be happy with the results of the sporting performances of our teams, but yet there must be something that keeps us locked into that. And so there's a whole social machinery that does that, through the social ritual, through the proof, and as I was talking about earlier, through that whole neurological reward system that goes with the pleasure pathways of our brain.
So what were the key takeaways with your research? Because I do find this fascinating. If I asked what were the things that really blew you away through your research, what were they, Aaron?
Well, the other part I haven't mentioned yet is that both sport and religion have an incredible propensity for what let's call it a transcendental or peak experience. So we know a little bit about this during the excitement, that collective euphoria with the neurochemicals and the dopamine surges and so on. But the bit that surprises me is that if you look into the research, during periods of the really intense concentration and focus, when we get lost in sport, we also see another kind of neurological activity, and that is our brain waves synchronize. So our brain waves are just the electrical signals of what's going on in our minds, and different brain waves correlate to different kinds of thinking, like when we're asleep versus when we're thinking about solving a maths problem. But usually they're fairly messy and one dominates the other, but what we've discovered is that during those peak periods of engagement, those brainwaves actually synchronize, a bit like a symphony, like a harmonization. What's interesting for me is that the only other place we've found that in neuroscientific studies is when Tibetan monks reach deep meditation. So there's something quite interesting there that's occurring in the brain, a kind of harmonization, a deep, intense flow state. And then what happens, of course, is that what neuroscientists call hippocampal printing, which is a fancy way of saying the memory centers of our brain cement all those euphoric experiences and the peak experience that we have and then link them to meaning. So in a way, to answer your question, my argument is sport isn't just religion, it's meaning, it's drug, it's mystical experience all rolled into one.
Yeah, it is absolutely fascinating. Can I just pick up there, though, that when you were talking about, Aaron, that you could see there was some type of neurological cohesion. Is that between everyone sitting in the stadium and sitting in the lounge room watching that sport? You could actually see that they were cohesive in their reaction to watching it?
There is some research that indicates that large groups of people do end up mirroring each other in terms of both their behaviour and their experiences. We only know what any one given individual experiences in terms of their brain scan, because we can only fit one of them in at a time into an fMRI machine or another kind of scan. But what we can do is infer that, from their experiences of what they're thinking and how they report their experiences to how that fits into the stadium. But, there are studies that have shown that kind of synchrony in ritualistic behaviour as well across the stadium. We see it with the Vikings thunderclap or rhythmic chanting. And that chanting and the rhythms and the colours and the lights and the music all does have an effect on your brain and the experience as well.
It's such a fascinating insight. We can now justify why we're so passionate about our teams and engaging in sport. We appreciate you joining us. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you so much, Natasha. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And that was Professor Aaron Smith, the director of the University of Canberra's Research Institute for Sport and Exercise. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'll be back tomorrow with the weekend briefing. And on tomorrow's episode, Helen Smith is joined by influencer and new podcast host, Beck Judd.
I've never been one of those don't call me a wag type of people. Yeah. You want to call me a wag? Call me a wag. I'm confident in who I am and what I've done and my achievements. And I think it's almost like the word influencer as well. So now I used to be a wag, and now when I see my headlines about myself, it's influencer. That's kind of the negative title now. You're more than just an influencer. I have hosted a national radio show, TV show, I've written books. I'm a mum of 4 amazing kids. There's so much more. But if they want to call me an influencer, let them.
We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company. See you next time.